Today is August the 4th, 2017. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University, and today I am in the Oklahoma History Center in Oklahoma City to interview Melvena Heisch. And this is part of our O State Stories project, so thank you for meeting with me today.
My pleasure.
Let's begin with learning when and where you were born.
I was born August the 16th, 1952, in Indiantown Gap Military Reservation, Pennsylvania.
Wow, a long way from Oklahoma.
Long way. My father was serving in the Army at the time.
And so, happy birthday early.
Thank you.
And then how did you come back to Oklahoma?
Well, after my father was discharged from the military, and I was about 6 months old at the time, he and my mother moved to Garden City, Kansas, actually, where my dad had a job as a foreman on a ranch for a man named Red Atkins out there. He also had land in the Oklahoma Panhandle, where my mother was from, and that's sort of how they wound up there. And then in May of 1955, my parents decided to move back to Roger Mills County. My great-grandmother had gotten too elderly to remain on the family farm and moved into town, into Reydon. And my father purchased the farm from her, and it had been her and my great-grandfather Thurman had bought a relinquishment there in 1906, and that would be the farm that my dad and mother purchased, and that's where I grew up. So I lived there from that spring of 1955 until I finished college.
Was it your mother's side of the family that had the farm, or your dad's side?
It was my father's side of the family, the Thurman side.
The last name was Thurman?
Yes.
And is it still in the family?
It still is in our family.
And is it in the Centennial Farm Ranch?
It is. About a year before my mother passed away, we were able to get that designation for her. It was my father had died a few years earlier, and so unfortunately he didn't get to know about it, but my mom was really, really proud of that. And then after her death, my brother, my sister, and I decided to keep the property in a joint ownership. So that's still how we have it today, and lease the land out to a family friend.
Well, when your father was running it, what would he raise?
He raised wheat and cattle. He grew a number of other crops through the years. He always had some alfalfa hay. Up until about the time I was finishing college, he had cotton. He grew rye, mostly for winter pasture for the cattle. And my mom always had a garden, and we have a little corn and some watermelons as well as the vegetable garden.
Well, would you have to help with the farm?
We did. All of us kids helped out, and we did a lot of different things. I think my favorite part was probably helping with the cattle. We would help move them from pasture to pasture, or go count the cows for Dad. My brother and I did a lot of that on horseback. It was always fun. When the cotton was growing in the summertime, our job was mainly to help hoe the weeds out. By the time I was big enough to be of any use in pulling cotton, it was already being stripped mechanically. But we did help Dad with some of that, tromping the cotton down in the trailers after they were baled from the stripper and that sort of. We did a lot of that, and just a lot of general work around the farm. For several years, my dad also had a business on the side where he distributed Phillips 66 anhydrous ammonia fertilizer and a couple of other blends, and so that required all hands on deck. My brother helped with a lot of the farming and driving the tractor, and my mom helped my dad a lot with delivering the fertilizer, and I was in charge of the house, taking the orders and looking after my younger sister. So, it was just like most farm families were probably at that time, and I always enjoyed it. We helped Dad with, baling hay or whatever was needed in the garden or whatever. And when my brother and I were younger, the folks were still milking cows twice a day, and they were selling the cream to Gold Spot Dairy out of Enid. I don't believe that it hasn't existed for many, many years. The truck came around and picked up the cream, sort of the way the dairies pick up the milk. And so my brother and I were always responsible for going out and bringing the cows in from the pasture and setting things up for the first round of cows to come in to be milked and that sort of thing.
So homemade ice cream?
Homemade ice cream, you bet. That was a family tradition, and on your birthday you got to pick what flavor your ice cream was.
And what would you pick?
Chocolate was usually my pick.
So we should back up. How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have one brother who is 17 months younger than me. His name is Harold, and he now lives in Topeka, Kansas with his family. And my sister is 10 years younger than me, and her name now is Charlotte Nance. And she and her husband have 2 children. My brother also has a couple of children. But my brother-in-law and sister live on the family farm out near Reydon.
Okay. Continue to farm? Or
Well, they don't farm. It's still leased out to the same person, but they're there to kind of keep an eye on things.
Well, when you were doing all this kind of work as a child, what would you do for fun?
Oh gosh, there was always plenty of time for that. Of course, we had friends from school. We went to the First Methodist Church in Reydon, so there were church activities that we took part in. But a lot of our recreational things were revolved around the school. All of us kids played basketball, and that was just a huge part of our lives during the basketball season during school. I was in 4-H Club and took part in, was very active in that, took part in speech and demonstration competitions in the county and at the state competition, did share the fun skits and all that. We enjoyed that. Around the school, I enjoyed our junior and senior plays and all those sorts of things. Were just great fun. And class parties, we did hay rides, we did roller skating parties, and then just hanging out with our friends, I guess. That was, we'd do, had a lot of friends that would come do sleepovers, and we'd go ride horses or bikes or just walk around the farm, whatever. So it wasn't a whole lot of, there were movies. We'd go to the movies some. There was still a movie theater in Cheyenne at that time when I was growing up.
And how far is that from Reydon?
From Reydon, it's about 17 miles, so that was about a 25-mile drive for us. There was just the one theater. By the time I was in high school in the county there in Cheyenne, there had been a movie theater in Reydon. It closed, though. It must have closed around 1960, give or take. I just barely remember movies being shown there.
How big of a town was that?
Reydon is very small. Population there today is around 250, 300 people, I would guess. It was a little bigger than that when I was still in school, but there was a very active little downtown business district, a block or two long, and I can remember 4 grocery stores and maybe 3 filling stations, the post office. There were a couple of beauty shops, and so there were a drugstore, which we called it a drugstore. It was really a cafe, and they had a soda fountain, and there was a barber shop. So that was when I was in grade school. Saturday night was still a big deal to go to town. My dad and brother would get their haircuts at the barber shop. Mom would buy groceries, and there was just people everywhere in town doing the same thing. And on the kids would be playing outside on the sidewalk, running around and just doing what kids do, I guess, and especially in the summertime. But there was even a variety store still, Gilbert's Variety Store. And Miss Gilbert also owned the movie theater that closed a little bit before her variety store did, but that was still a very social thing in the community, and that probably lasted up until the time I was about maybe 4th, 5th grade, long in there. But a lot of memories of doing that, and it was a lot of fun.
Would they have 4th of July parades and that sort of thing?
Actually, no 4th of July parade, but they did for a few years. The Chamber of Commerce decided to try to kind of stimulate the local economy and get some interest in the town, and they would have a little parade on June 3rd, which was the official birthday of Reydon's founding. Reydon actually began its life after the little town of Rankin moved up to the railroad. That's what caused Reydon to be there, was when the Santa Fe went through. And so some of the buildings from old Rankin, south of town there, about 2 miles, were moved up to the railroad in the late 20s. And so they called June 3rd their birthday. So the parade was pretty small, but we had a lot of fun doing it anyway.
And what about Christmas?
Christmas traditions out there for the town. Santa Claus would always come. That was another Chamber of Commerce event on a Saturday, as close to Christmas, usually right before Christmas. And except he came on a flatbed truck. There was seldom did we have any white Christmas out there, but they would pull the truck up in the middle of Main Street, right out in front of the grocery stores, and Santa would be on the back of the truck and hand out bags of treats on behalf of the chamber to all the kids. Everybody, I guess, got the treats. They'd come up and he'd hand them out and do the Santa Claus routine, and they'd have a big drawing for prizes and that sort of thing. And our church, Methodist Church, also had a Christmas program, as I guess most churches do, service. And then at the close of the service, we knew everything was winding up when Santa Claus arrived. And he would make noise outside, usually banging on the door or something. Kids were supposed to think the reindeer were landing on the roof. That's what the minister would tell us. Anyway, Santa would come in, and again, he had bags of treats. All the adults in the church had bagged those up, and they gave them to everybody, adults and kids, and he would hand those out and talk to the children and ask them what they wanted for Christmas. And they did that, long after I was gone from home. They were still doing that until the church got too small and there just weren't children there anymore. But it was always fun. And
what would be in the bag? The
bags of treats, I can even remember that like it was last year. They always had an apple and an orange and a selection of walnuts and pecans that you had to shell. So that meant Daddy had his work cut out for him. And then they would have a bag of candy inside that larger bag. There was always the hard Christmas candy, the ribbon candy, and they would have orange slices and just whatever happened to have been available, I guess. And they made sure that if there were shut-ins in the community or church members who were too ill or elderly to make it out that night for the program, the adults would take those treats to those families, those people.
Pretty close-knit community.
Close, very, very close. The kids in my high school graduating class, I'm still in communication with all of them.
And how many were they?
There were 15 of us.
And boys, how many boys and girls?
There were, out of the 15, there were 8 boys and 7 girls. My first grade class had started with 25. And by the time we were seniors, I believe there were 10 or 11 of those 15 had started first grade together.
Wow.
And there would be 4 of us that graduated together from Southwestern at Weatherford, and then a 5th who would finish the year after us. So that's been friends a long time.
Sure. How often do you get to see them, visit with them?
Not nearly as often anymore as I once did, but we have class reunions from time to time, and there's email now, and I run into a lot of them come to Oklahoma City today. You run into people all the time at concerts and things like that. So,
And you mentioned that you played basketball in high school.
I did.
What position?
Well, I played guard because the Oklahoma was very slow to move into the full court 5-on-5 game that is played today for women. We still played the 6-man team and played half court, and I played defense. Mostly I played defense from the bench because I was not a starter, but I was a part of the team and I loved it, and that was just really an important clique to be a part of the basketball team.
What was the colors, team colors?
Red and white. We were the Reydon Tigers.
Tigers.
And our team was, when I was in high school, and I played from grade school through, our high school team, year we were seniors, we had a very good team, and we missed getting to come to state tournament by 1 game. We lost in the finals of the area tournament in an overtime. That was our last game we got to play, and that was a tough one.
Well, how would you get back and forth to the games?
The school bus.
School bus?
Yeah, they had just a regular school bus was how we went. We played several teams over in Texas too, because it was so far to travel to teams to play, and so in order to fill out the year's schedule, we played Allison, Briscoe, Mobeetie, Miami, and Higgins, Texas. Played all of those little schools.
Small towns too, I guess.
Small, very small. Some of them even smaller than Reydon.
Well, how small is it? Oh, you said it's 250.
300, something like that, yeah.
And all those businesses are no longer there?
No, they've everything that was there when I was living at home, every single one of those places have closed now. There's a convenience store, cafe, filling station combo, and then another cafe, and that's really about it for business there now.
Any of those buildings make it to the preservation?
Actually, no, there's not a single building in Reydon that made it to the National Register of Historic Places. The school buildings were definitely eligible for the National Register. We recorded those during the WPA survey that we did in combination with OSU Department of History back in the 80s, but both of those buildings were subsequently torn down.
Oh, shucks.
Yeah.
Well, in high school, what was your favorite subject?
Well, I would have to say it was history. I did love history. I also, I just love school, so most of the subjects I did enjoy. I liked math a lot, and that was just one of the things that was really important in our school. We didn't have a lot of extra classes to take. We got the core curriculum, but history was really my favorite.
And what year would you have graduated?
I graduated from high school on May 4th, 1970.
1970. And then where did you go?
I attended undergraduate school. At the time it was Southwestern State College. Of course today it's Southwestern Oklahoma State University, but the name changed the year after I finished.
And why did you decide to go there?
Well, a lot of my friends were going there from high school, and there were friends that a little bit older than me that were already there, and also it was close to home. It was only 90 miles, and so that was one of the reasons that I chose there. My dad had graduated at Panhandle A&M, and I think he might have thought it would have been a good idea for me to go there because it was a little bit smaller school, but it was quite a bit further, and he wanted me to go wherever I chose. So he and my mom had met at Panhandle. So.
Well, did they take you the first and drop you off, or
They moved me there. I lived in Stewart Hall, the oldest women's dorm on campus, the whole time I was there. They moved me there, and we went home. Several of us would go home together most weekends, so there was always somebody to ride with. I had a couple of friends that lived in my dorm that were from Reydon, and so we rode together. And then after my brother started a school there a couple of years later, then he and I rode together on the weekends, and we'd give a lift to others that needed a ride. So that's never a problem.
And it's about 90 miles, so
90 miles.
an hour and a half or so.
Yeah, it was an easy drive.
Far enough to take your laundry back.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And you majored in history there?
I majored in social science education. My thoughts when I started school there were that I was going to teach history. And I took the block semester. I got a teaching certificate, did student teaching and all of that. But before I actually had finished my degree, one of my professors that taught history there, his name is Terry Wilson, became a good friend after college, suggested that I might think about graduate school. He was finishing his PhD at OSU and knew about the new public history program that they had opened there, and that Dr. Leroy Fisher was the person who would be the chairman for the committees for the students that were pursuing that degree, and he thought I ought to explore that. He actually took me to Stillwater to meet Dr. Fisher and to visit the campus, and I had already decided that I thought I would probably do that before I did my student teaching, and student teaching convinced me that probably high school teaching wasn't going to be the thing I would enjoy doing the most, and decided there was always time to go back to that. So that's how I wound up at OSU.
What didn't you like about teaching?
I would have enjoyed it if I thought the students were really interested in the subject, and it just seemed difficult to hold their attention and get them to focus on history. And I think I was coming from the small school that I did and thinking about careers that women might pursue. I'd really never been exposed to jobs that women did in those days, except nurses and teachers or clerks in stores or waitresses. I just hadn't been exposed to what other things might be possible. And once I got to learning a little bit more about other career opportunities, I just decided that I was better suited to do something else than to teach. I didn't have the patience for it.
And so OSU from Reydon would be quite a piece.
Yes, I'm not sure exactly of what that mileage is, but it's over 200 miles, I think.
So not necessarily go every weekend.
No,
when you were there.
No, I didn't. But I had my first cousin who was already there in started undergraduate school the same year I started graduate school. And so he and I he went home a lot more frequently than I did, but when I wanted to go home, I always had a ride.
And that would have been mid-70s?
Yes, I got to campus in fall of 1974.
Okay. And what dorm did you live in?
I didn't. I shared an apartment just off campus. The apartments are still there. It was across Duck from the football practice field on a little street there called Matthews.
Okay.
Right on the corner there, and I shared an apartment with the sister-in-law of my professor from Southwestern that I mentioned, who took me up there, and his sister-in-law was from Tulsa, and she needed a roommate, and so that worked out real well for both of us.
Sure. And then, so you would have had to walk across campus to get to the history.
Mm-hmm. Just walked everywhere there, and that was one of the things I think I loved the most about OSU was that campus. It was always I just always liked walking around there. It's beautiful and it's so well maintained, and I just really enjoyed it. I'd been there a number of times through the years for 4-H Club Roundup.
Okay.
So I was already familiar with buildings, and that was a really big place to be when you graduated from high school at 15, in a class of 15. It was a little scary.
And would you go into the library at that point when you were in 4-H?
I knew where the library was, and I think they might have taken us there once. I don't remember the library so much as the student union.
Okay.
From 4-H Roundup. They would have lectures and programs and all sorts of things for us, and the demonstration competitions and things at Roundup that we did. But the library, while I was in graduate school there, because of I am legally blind, so therefore I needed some additional assistance in the library to locate materials, and I just was always so pleased, and it was easy to get help. And Vicki Withers was there at that time, and just usually who was on duty when I was in the library, and she was always really, really helpful to me.
And became Vicki Phillips.
And she became Vicki Phillips. Yeah.
Yeah, she was there when I came, so very helpful.
Yes.
So your major, was public history.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a favorite professor?
Dr. Fisher was it would be one of my favorite people of all time anyway, and was a huge influence on my life, and I hope that everybody who goes to college has a Dr. Fisher in their lives. But I also enjoyed very much the other professors I had too. Dr. Odie Falk was chairman of the department at that time, and was a very important influence. Dr. Norbert Mankin as well, and there were others, but those three were my major professors.
And did you write a thesis or a master's thesis?
I did the non-thesis program and had an internship in lieu of the thesis. So I was only on campus fall 74 and spring 75, and then I moved to Oklahoma City, rented an apartment here, and did my internship. I worked 40 hours a week for free, earning my graduate credit. I worked for the Oklahoma Historical Society for about 2/3 of a semester, and then finished the time at the Oklahoma Heritage Association. That's the nonprofit statewide group, and they're now known today as the Oklahoma Hall of Fame.
Okay. And you would have graduated in 76 then?
I was a December 75
Okay.
graduate, but went through the spring graduation exercise.
So you did go through?
I did.
Good. Do you remember the date?
I don't remember the exact date, but it must have been in May of 75, and I do remember that David Boren was who handed me my diploma. He was governor. Well, I guess at the time, he was governor at that time. And of course, the president there was still Dr. Calm. So it was Dr. Calm and Governor Boren.
And were your parents in the audience?
They were. Yes, they sure were.
And brother and sister, I guess, too. But
my sister was there. Actually, I don't believe my brother was. He was already living in Topeka, and that was he'd already been through a couple of graduation ceremonies for me, so that was a little too much to expect.
And so from there, take us through once you finish at OSU.
Well, fortunately, that OSU internship at the Oklahoma Historical Society put me in a really good position. The State Historic Preservation Office, where I work now, opened as a separate division within the agency in November of 75 while I was doing my internship. And they had one person, Dr. Howard Meredith, who'd been hired to set up the office and begin to operate the federal preservation programs as the National Park Service wanted them handled. The program was very, very new. The federal law was only passed in '66, and offices were just getting established and staffed and geared up, and the duties, including National Register nominations, was the main thing they were doing, were kind of scattered in other departments, and it was time to start getting a professional staff together. And so because I was there as an intern with the degree I just was getting, Howard needed some help, and the only position he could get created right away was for a secretary clerk typist. And Dr. Fisher told me that, and this is advice that as I've worked and had to hire people through the years, I wish somebody would advise everybody of this, that the most important thing is to get the first job and get your foot in the door and to not worry what that job is. If you're willing to work and do the job they've got, that it will be easier to move up. So I took his advice. And on the 12th of January 1976, I was employed as Howard's secretary. They hired me on an emergency thing, which was just a temporary job, but over the next several months, they were able to get me on full time. And then in a couple of years, as promised, they got positions created for professionals, and I was the first one of those they hired and got me promoted to a position called architectural historian. And I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. Dr. Fisher was serving on the Historical Society's Board of Directors, so I had a good reference. And so there have been, with Terry Wilson from Southwestern, Dr. Fisher from OSU, and Howard Meredith here, those three men very important in my career.
Very significant.
The reason that I have a job and was able to stay here and to work up and to do something that I found I really, really, truly enjoyed and believed in.
40 years later, right?
40
or close to 40.
Yeah, 41 years in January, from January 12, 76 until now. So a little over 41 years.
That's a long time in one spot.
It's a long time.
You've been instrumental in, I would think, in getting a lot of places listed.
Well, I've been involved with it in one capacity or another, and as of right now, we've got just over 1,300 listings, and some of those listings represent districts that may include hundreds of buildings. So there have been lots of interest in historic preservation. It's grown in Oklahoma. Really, things have changed over the last 40 years, but a lot of that, the work that our office has been able to accomplish, is because of the partnerships that we have with Oklahoma State University and with the University of Oklahoma. The National Register nominations and our survey program were coordinated in partnership with OSU's Department of History and Geography for our standing structures surveys and a lot of National Register projects. The survey and nominations, we began working with the Department of History in the late 70s, and then Geography Department came on board to do a lot of that work. The History Department on some thematic surveys that we continue to use constantly and adding to that database would be the statewide survey for WPA resources. Dr. David Baird directed that between 84 and 87. Dr. Joe Stout directed our Route 66 survey initially, and that one continues to be a huge area of interest in Oklahoma. Dr. Baird also did our grain elevator survey in western Oklahoma. And Dr. Marianne Anders was instrumental in many of those activities and in our county courthouses project and folk art environment nominations. So it was just a great partnership where we paid 50 to 60% of the costs. The university matched that. We have to have non-federal match, and we don't have the state dollars for that. We couldn't have done all of that without that partnership. And then Geography Department continues today working with us. We finished a 5-year survey of historic barns. We've looked at documented barns in every county of the state, and they recorded over 700 barns statewide. And we're, as time and interest on the part of property owners comes to our attention, we've been nominating some of those successfully to full listing in the National Register. And then we have an ongoing partnership with the Geography Department under Dr. Alan Finchum to digitize and maintain our online databases for those National Register listings and our Oklahoma Landmarks Inventory that includes something around 60,000 entries of properties recorded for standing structures through our various survey activities. So OSU has been a big part of my life from my educational years clear through now to my impending retirement. And then our partnership with the University of Oklahoma includes our survey and National Register efforts for archaeological resources. Since the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey is there, they work with us on the same kinds of projects for archaeology that OSU did on the standing structures. And we have an ongoing cooperative arrangement there for the survey to provide us professional expertise in the review of federal undertakings. That's an important part of what the SHPO does. We review any federally aided construction project, whether it's federal funding, licensing, or permitting. And OU, again, provides the non-federal match, and we pay 60% of the costs. And that works on an ongoing basis, like our work with Dr. Finchum and the geography department for our digitization efforts. And it makes it possible to spread the money out and the program and involve both of the state's major research institutions, and helps us spread the work out across the state to record the resources in rural areas and cities and towns alike. So
I think it's Dr. Bays that was doing the barns, wasn't it?
yes, Dr. Brad Bays was the director of the barn survey, and he continued. He's worked with us on a number of others as the principal investigator, and he's currently finishing up a survey of modern house architecture in Payne County, and another study of World War II era airfields statewide. So
modern house.
Modern houses.
I'm not sure what that would be.
Well, modern houses, we define modern architecture as things that are constructed after the late 1940s up into the mid-70s. And it's really difficult for a lot of people to accept that things that recently constructed could be historic. And I think a big part of that, it's hard for people to accept that something that was built after the date of their birth could be historic. And people have this idea that the land runs mark the beginning of history in Oklahoma, which is totally inaccurate because the Native Americans were here long, thousands of years before Anglos were here. Or they think that history stopped in 1907, that with statehood they don't tend to think of things happening after that date as having historical significance. So, and then you move into things that are eligible for the National Register have to be at least 50 years old in most instances. So today that means something built 1967 or earlier. And that's really hard for a lot of people to accept.
I know, and then Dr. Carney did some shotgun houses when we first moved here.
Yes, Dr. George Carney in the geography department was very much involved with us in the late 70s into the 80s. He was working on our historic context programs, and he especially addressed the theme studies that we were doing, including the archival research and development of the historical context, but also did a lot of field survey on energy-related resources, some really groundbreaking things that he did for us, and his work and his students are the reason we have some of the oil field resources like roundhouses and first oil well drilled in various oil fields, business and commercial buildings associated with the early oil companies. So those were the kind of things that those things had not been addressed before. Another important study that he did that we continue to use regularly was his survey of Oklahoma's all-black towns.
Okay.
Very important work that was done from that. And he did the surveys of the towns that were designated for all blacks, and then also looked at those cities that had a large African American population, such as Duncan and Ardmore, and produced a number of successful National Register nominations for those properties. The keeper of the National Register, Carol Scholl, was the one receiving those nominations and listing them at the time they were being produced, and she was here in June of this year to speak at our statewide conference. She's recently retired but continues to be involved, and she would make the comment to the group about how important the work was that the Oklahoma SHPO had done to identify resources related to African Americans, that was one of the most important efforts that she had seen that was systematic nationwide, and a very early effort on the part of an SHPO to record those resources. So we've got Dr. Carney and OSU Geography to thank for that.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Boley has their business district is on the register.
Yes, Boley's downtown is also a National Historic Landmark, very important designation. That was done in when the National Park Service was doing a theme study for the bicentennial, is when they did that in 1975-76 is when they were working on that. So Dr. Carney's study with us really Boley was really the only property that we had. That and Flipper's Ditch at Fort Sill and the Bill Pickett grave site at the 101 Ranch. That really constituted what we had identified and recorded for African American related resources in Oklahoma until Dr. Carney's survey.
Well, actually, you know a lot about Oklahoma, period. History and place.
Yes.
Are there any places that you wanted to get listed and haven't been able to?
We've been able to, just through the years, to work on a number of properties that were, really important to us. One of the disappointments, I guess, that I've had, we actually achieved National Register listing for Chilocco Indian Boarding School there in Kay County, and we worked on an effort to have it designated a National Historic Landmark, but unfortunately we were not successful. Some of the tribes who have ownership of that property objected to the designation, mainly due to a misunderstanding about what it really means and economic development activities that they had planned to carry on there, so we were not successful with that effort. So most of the ones that we wanted to see listed that were eligible at the time have been listed. There are going to be some other things come along that are just now reaching that 50-year mark that will be important to pursue.
Such as?
Let's think of some of the modern houses in Payne County, for example. Those things are going to be eligible, and as long as the private property owners consent, we'll be able to list a number of those in the National Register.
How about the tower that's down here in Oklahoma City, the yellow one? I don't know what it's called. It's round.
The yellow. Oh, the Citizens Bank Tower?
Yes.
The Gold Dome Bank.
Yes.
Both of those buildings are listed in the National Register.
They're already 50 years old then?
Actually, the bank, when the Gold Dome Bank at 23rd and Classen, that's how most people refer to it, as the Gold Dome. It was historically the Citizens State Bank building. It was threatened with demolition in the early 2000s. It was going to be demolished as a location for a Walgreens. And the bank no longer needed that much space. How banks function in their, where you make your deposits and the tellers serve the public, the space needs have changed. But no one could have ever guessed that of all the buildings that could be threatened with demolition in Oklahoma, that one would be the one to stimulate real advocacy and protest. But it did, and it was all local citizens. That's where historic preservation really happens, is at the grassroots, the local level. Our office provides some tools and programs, but if the local citizens don't want it to happen, it's not going to. And those people organized, they attended planning commission meetings, they got things delayed for the demolition permits, and they protested. They had a picket out on the sidewalk on 23rd and Classen every Thursday afternoon from 4 until about 6 every evening for 1 solid year and a couple of weeks. Never missed, rain or shine. They were out there, and when you think about the time of the day they were there, is rush hour. And they got a lot of attention from that. And they had their signs. One of the fellows had a large dog that he put a sign on and walked him up and down about Save the Gold Dome. A local musical group called Jotmo recorded a little song, real catchy little jingle called Can't Find My Way Home Without the Dome. There were t-shirts and buttons, and pretty soon everybody involved decided there was a compromise. And one of the biggest pieces was somebody willing to buy the Gold Dome. And they found a person, Dr. Irene Lamb, who's an optometrist, purchased it for her office and some other uses. The bank moved across Western to the east of the Gold Dome, built a new smaller building where they operate today. And Walgreens found their own location across Classen to the west, a restaurant that had operated there for a number of years. They purchased that property, demolished the building, and built the store that Walgreens functions at. So everybody won in that one, and everybody got to stay at the same intersection. Unfortunately, the Gold Dome sits empty right now, but the current owner continues his efforts to find a new use for it. And then the tower immediately behind it was the Citizen Bank Tower, and it was an office building. I think it's 12 or 13 stories, very unusual modern architecture design. Has separate ownership, and it has been adapted for market rate housing, really great apartments with incredible views there, and was rehabilitated using the federal and state tax credits, as was the Gold Dome itself. And so that continues to have a high occupancy rate, and there's no longer any threat for either of those. Both of those buildings are modern. The bank was just turned 50 years old about the time it was nominated. The tower was less than 50. And you can list newer buildings, provided you can demonstrate exceptional merit, usually in architecture. And that's the situation that we have there. We have a National Register nomination right now, today, is in Washington for consideration, that has a period of significance of 1972 or 3 to 1976. It was originally a church, but it's nominated as church studio. And during that mid-70s time was when Leon Russell was recording there. And that's why it's been nominated, for its association with Russell. So,
it's pretty cool too.
It's cool too, yeah.
I was reading yesterday, there's another building Brahms is trying to, the Highlow or...
Yes, we're now the Highlow Club, and whether or not, that building has had a lot of alteration, and it's very, very doubtful that could be justified right now for listing in the National Register, but there's a lot of community interest in that simply because it is a social landmark for the community. So it'll be interesting to watch and see how that one turns out.
So you don't have anything to do with
Not right now.
At the moment?
No. Most of the time, for us to be involved in the local controversy, about the only role that we could have is to help the proponents and or the property owners determine if it is eligible for the National Register.
Okay.
We don't have any legal authority to comment one way or another or to help slow down or prevent demolitions or insensitive alterations unless there is federal money involved or federal license or permit under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. There are no state statutes that extend that kind of protection. The real protection comes from local government through a historic preservation ordinance. And even if your city has that kind of ordinance in place, the local government still has to have determined where they're going to implement that ordinance. Oklahoma City has the preservation ordinance, the oldest one in the state actually. It's been in place since '69, I believe. And they've designated a number of historic districts and individual landmarks across the city, but the building that houses the Highlow Club is not currently among those. The biggest incentive that we have for affecting rehabilitation of some of these buildings that might otherwise sit vacant or be demolished, such as the Gold Dome or the Citizens Bank Tower, the Church Studio in Tulsa, and many others, is through the federal and now state rehabilitation tax credits. Mm-hmm. And you can see the impact of those credits, a real important economic incentive for rehab, and it's really having huge impacts on the overall economy of communities statewide. It helps create jobs. It's helping bring vibrant new businesses and places for restaurants, entertainment, retail, all kinds of things back in downtowns and older parts of the communities. And so that state credit's existence is one of, I think, my proudest accomplishments while I've been in this position working with State Representative Debbie Blackburn and others in the legislature. In 2005, our office and our good friends at Preservation Oklahoma and the Oklahoma Main Street program, who led the advocacy, we were able to get that legislation passed to greatly increase what an existing bill had extended some credit to just a handful of buildings in a very, very narrowly defined use. And since these state credits have gone into effect, anything that qualifies for the federal credits qualify for the state. So it doubles the impact of those federal credits, and it's really exciting to see so many historic buildings being revitalized, and it's helping people see that old buildings could still be used, and in addition to the economic impacts in the community, those benefits extend to environmental issues as well. We don't have to see all of those buildings being demolished and the remains dumped in landfills. There's an investment of energy to construct those buildings originally and to produce the materials they're built of. So it's important to environmental protection to rehab those. So the people in the preservation advocacy world like to say that preservation was green before green was cool.
Well, along your favorite topics, I'm assuming Route 66 is probably
Route 60, absolutely. Route 66 is one of those kind of quirky kind of things, I think, for people to think about, and it's one that continues to be one of the best assets our state has to promote for heritage tourism. I think it continues to be a little bit underutilized in communities that could be benefiting from it a little bit more, but we like to think that we've helped promote our first survey was a very initial effort. 1984, as I said earlier, was directed by Dr. Joseph Stout from OSU History Department and Dr. Mary Ann Anders, who was working in their public history program at the time, were the lead on that with a number of graduate students. And they would produce our first National Register nominations that were for buildings and things along the road of the original alignment, the 1926 alignment. So that was a very initial effort. And as time would pass, we began to add to that and expand. The National Park Service Route 66 Corridor Program was created in 1999 by federal statute. They office under their Long Distance Trails program out in Santa Fe, but they provide a little bit of money. And we were fortunate enough to get some of that in 2002, so we built and expanded that survey that Dr. Stout and the History Department folks had produced for us originally, greatly expanded that, and generated a number of other National Register nominations, and we continue to add nominations to those thematic nominations today. We've got, I haven't counted for a while, but there are about somewhere between around 60 National Register entries in Oklahoma for properties that are either roadbed segments or bridges, or that directly relate to travel on Route 66 that are listed in the National Register. The route, since all of that helped generate a lot of interest, and the road was designated an Oklahoma State Scenic Byway and then subsequently a National Scenic Byway. Sadly, those programs have been idle for a number of years due to the federal budget situations, but those designations help draw tourists. And a lot of the economic impact studies that we've been involved with show that heritage tourists tend to stay longer in a community and spend more money than other tourists. They are also looking for a real authentic experience, and Route 66 draws a tremendous number of tourists from other countries come here to Oklahoma. So the days are few that you could go out. You can still go out and drive a lot of miles of the original roadbed in Oklahoma, and I doubt you could ever go out there and not spot at least one license plate from out of state or a group of motorcycle riders that probably speak German. So it's a lot of fun, and I've gotten to work with the National Park Service and a lot of other people from the other states involved in Route 66 through some Park Service task forces and things where we work to promote preservation all along the route. We're a part of a much bigger, it's a route-long program, not just an Oklahoma one, and that's been something that's been a lot of fun for me, a special personal pleasure for me.
Yeah, I think that they do a statue over in Tulsa with the Avery.
Right, the Cyrus Avery statue is over there, and the Ozark Trails program that predates Route 66. There are a couple of those markers for the Ozark Trails still left. One over by Stroud and one in Langston, and we've gotten both of those listed in the National Register. The one at Langston most recently, just about a year ago. So there's just all kinds of stuff, and the bridges. The best remaining segment of Route 66, original roadbed, original alignment, and bridges, 17.7 miles long from Bridgeport to Hydro, Oklahoma. We got listed in the National Register a number of years ago, and that probably, and not just us saying so because we're from Oklahoma, but National Park Service people and others who know a lot about roads nationwide believe that's one of the best historic roadbed segments left in the country. And that draws a lot of people like to drive that, because you can come and have over 17 and a half miles of historic road with the sweeping curves and the amazing vistas and the almost mile-long Pony Truss Bridge that you get to drive across. That is a Route 66 cool experience.
Plus, I think the gas station's close to there.
A lot of gas stations. Lucille's. That's right.
That's what I'm thinking.
That's exactly right. Lucille's sadly is closed right now, but Lucille was one of those Route 66 legends, And a new Lucille's restaurant operates in Weatherford, so if you want to see something associated to her namesake, or if you ever have occasion to visit the cemetery at Hydro, look for Lucille's grave. Her grave marker is a granite Route 66 shield shape.
Okay.
So that's part of the Route 66, just how much that means to people. It just really drives emotions and a lot of things, oddities along the route, and things everybody probably think of as kitsch or kind of funky, but it's all a part of the experience. Yeah.
The blue whale.
The blue whale, or curio shops, or teepee-shaped motels out west. So it's just it's really interesting.
Yes.
So.
These things don't just happen overnight. It seems like it could take a year or more to get something.
It does not happen overnight. The National Register itself is designed to be sure that it is well researched, well reasoned, thoroughly documented, that it's accurate and real and authentic, that it's not something that's out of someone's imagination. So that's why professionals are involved in doing the research, preparing nominations, reviewing them in this office. That's why we're required to have professionals on staff. Anyone can propose a nomination, but they have to have the professional review. Then a 5-member board known as the Historic Preservation Review Committee, appointed by our governor, reviews and makes recommendations about the nominations to our state historic preservation officer, who actually nominates them. So all of this requires time and effort, and can certainly take, depending on how long it took to do the research and write the form, it can take easily 6 months to a year, and sometimes longer than that.
And you have any idea how many you've done?
When I first started work in the office, there were a little over 200 National Register listings, and there's now 1,300 and some. So I've been involved in one way or another, whether it was editing and reviewing them, or just overseeing those who have to do that work. They do the hard part. Over 1,000.
Over 1,000.
Yeah.
And you're planning to retire soon.
I'm retiring very soon. On my official date is October 1 of this year.
I think you will be missed a lot.
Well, I'm leaving it in good hands. There's really dedicated, passionate people that work for me, and they will pick it up and move right on, as well as those people that at our partner institutions, as people have come and gone there, and new people doing the jobs, and it will all be in very good hands. And I plan to still be around for a while and be involved in ways that maybe I couldn't be involved as a private citizen, that I couldn't do as a government employee.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. And do you want to talk a little bit about the Murrah building?
I'd be happy to do that, if you would like me to.
Sure.
Just explain. Yes, the State Historic Preservation Office is a department of the Oklahoma Historical Society, and when I began my career, we were officed in the Wiley Post Historical Building, which today is known as the Oklahoma Judicial Center. It's now the home of the Oklahoma Supreme Court. The building was constructed about 1930 and was primarily a museum, library, and archives. And as the functions of the agency had grown, office space had to be carved out here and there at the end of museum galleries or whatever. And space was really becoming tight for our functions. So our department, because we have federal funding each year that gives us a luxury that other departments don't have, we had enough cash to lease space away from the building. So that's what we did. And through the state leasing office, we found a very acceptable space for our needs in the Journal Record Building in downtown Oklahoma City. It's located at Northwest 6th and Robinson. And people today will know that building not as the Journal Record, but as the Oklahoma Memorial Museum. And we were in an office on the 3rd floor south side of that building, just about where the modern addition joins the original part of that building. There's windows that lead into the hallway, and if you were standing in the Oklahoma City Memorial today and looking up, you could tell where the two parts of the building join, and count up to the 3rd floor, and right from that joint and the window by it, if you went to the left, that would be where our offices were. We moved into that space in October of 1991, and that's where we were on April the 19th, 1995, when Timothy McVeigh set off the truck bomb that destroyed the federal building and did so much damage in that part of downtown Oklahoma City, including the damage to the Journal Record building. I was in the office that day. A staff member and I were preparing to leave for a meeting in Cordell later that morning. And we were standing in a hallway inside our office suite talking with another staff member about a brochure rack that we needed to buy to put in our reception area to hold our materials. And Stan Mayer was the staff member standing by me, and we were talking with Catherine Davis, our secretary. Stan's back was directly in alignment with the window from our conference room that looked out across a parking lot directly to the Murrah building. And I was standing to his left, Catherine to his right, when the bomb exploded. And I remember the sound was so incredibly loud. I have no memory of going down. My first memory is putting my hands on a chair and getting up. Stan has a hold of my arm and he's saying to me, "Melvena, we have to get out of here. We're hurt." And there were two sounds quickly together, very loud, and everything went dark. My first thought was there had been a lot of construction going on in our building, and we had a couple of false alarm fire alarms, and we had to evacuate the building, and people grumbled as they do. There was a stair. You stepped out our office door into the corridor. The stairwell was immediately across from us, so we'd gotten used to it, just going out, running down the stairs and going out on the street, ending up on usually in the parking lot or sometimes out on the street on the north side of the building, or depending on where we were at when we did the evacuation. And that's what I thought had happened. I thought to myself, what have they done now? And then as we're getting up out of the floor, I'm thinking how loud that was, and that was more like maybe a natural gas line had exploded. That was kind of what was going through my mind. Stan and I were both severely injured because we would learn that the glass, every window in that building was knocked out all the way around it, not just on the side facing the Murrah building. Had someone been standing by that window in our conference room that was behind Stan, he was across the room from it. If you'd been right there, you would have been looking straight at the Ryder truck across the parking lot. So when the bomb exploded, we all got up, found our way out. One of our staff members, Marshall Geddes, who's now deceased, had been across the hall in the men's room, and he took a lot of kidding about this later, but he got absolutely not a scratch because of where he was. And he led us. He said, "Come on, we'll go down this." And so everybody started down the stairs, got down one flight. Remember, we were on 3. Got down one flight, and the door in the stairwell leading onto the next landing was shut, and he couldn't get it open. And he called back up that someone had locked, for some reason, stupidly had locked that door. So we all turned around, climbed back up the stairs onto the 3rd floor and went the length of the building to the north side and exited there. All of this time, Stan has a hold of me, and I'm not aware that I am injured. I kind of felt something wet on my neck, but I was thinking, because the ceilings had collapsed, the acoustical tile ceilings that are ubiquitous in office buildings, they had remodeled in there 2 or 3 times, and that's what was in our offices, was the most recent version of that, complete with the multi-fluorescent tubed light fixtures. And I was thinking that there was something from air conditioning or something, oil or condensate or something wet on me. But as we're leaving, I lost a shoe somewhere along the way because all of the marble wainscoting on the hallways in that building had peeled from the walls and was in the floor. You had to climb over this huge chunks of this stuff had been split loose. And a little bit before the stairway, Stan tells someone else to take my hand, that he can't make it. And he sat down, and we told him we'd send help back. And he would eventually be I honestly do not know who removed him to the ambulance, but he would be taken to St. Anthony's Hospital, where he was read the last rites. He would recover, but he would not be able to work for almost a full year, and continues to this day to have problems associated with his injuries, physical problems. Like me, the injuries were all due to glass penetration. So someone helped me, and I'm going down the stairs, and the state agency that handles the student loan program for Oklahoma was also renting space in the Journal Record building, 1 floor below us, and we knew a couple of the folks that worked there. Fact is, I think one of those fellows had gone to OSU and knew some of my staff. I can't remember for sure now. But those guys were in the stairwell, and I remember that one of them said, "Somebody grab Melvena, she's going to faint." And they grabbed me and carried me out to the street. There were already, the street was packed. The sidewalks were packed with people from buildings all around. By the time they got me out to the intersection of 6th and Robinson, they carried me into the street and laid me down where EMTs were already there. There was already an ambulance that had arrived. And they were working with a number of people that later I wouldn't know were hurt a lot worse than I was. The street was paved in shards of glass, small little pieces of glass, like the size of your thumbnail or a little bigger. And they just laid me down in that glass. And there were people that were coming up to see what they could do to help. There was a man came up and identified himself as a doctor. He was just in street clothes. He came up. He said, "I'm a doctor. My office is down the street." He said, and he looked at me, and I had serious cuts on my neck and on the side of my face, and I would learn later the backs of my legs. He didn't even know that at the time, but the injury to my neck was what was of concern to him at the moment. He said, "You're lucky. It missed your jugular vein by 1/4 of an inch." He said, "You're going to be okay. There's a lot of blood. You're going to be okay, but they're going to take you to the hospital." And another guy was standing by, and he called to this fella and said, "Can you come up here and hold her head and shoulders up out of the glass?" And this man knelt down and held my upper body in his arms until the EMTs could get to me to load me on the stretcher. Never did know that man's name, but he worked at a drug rehab center down the street. He told me that. And he kept talking to me. They would tell me later I was shocky. And so I guess they were trying to keep me as alert as they could. A couple of members of my staff saw me in the street. Catherine, the secretary, came up to me, and I handed her my glasses to take, because I don't know why, I know you were a little bit goofy by this time. And Pam McCarty, who is still on my staff today, the only member of that staff at the time that's still with me, she was arriving late that morning because of her daughter's school. And she saw the smoke that blew skyward from the bombing, and she arrived after it had happened, but she was able to get inside the perimeter before they had time to block. The police hadn't got it blocked yet, and she was able to get down toward the Journal Record and come to me in the street. So she would be the one that she and Catherine would be the ones who got back out here to the Capitol complex through a variety of walking mostly, and people giving them lifts to let others know what had happened. It was chaos. It was total chaos. And I was transported to the OU Health Sciences Center, to Memorial Hospital, that at that time what it was known as, and that's where I was taken into the ER. They had me strapped on a C-board, took me in. There were 3 of us transported in that one ambulance, and I'd never been in an ambulance ever in my life, so it was a very, very, very scary time, but things were moving so fast. One of the things that I remember from that time was how time seemed to have just, I guess, stopped, because the bomb happened at 9:02. I was in the emergency. I was in ER within 20 minutes. Wow. It just seemed like a lot longer. They administered to me there and discovered that the injuries to my legs could not be dealt with by stitches, that it was going to require a surgical procedure that they performed the next day. But I was in a room. They'd stitched me up. The guy sewing me up, I remember asking how many. He said he lost count at 100 stitches. So there were people far worse injuries than me that were also in that ER. They got to me quickly though, got me settled. My husband had been called at his work. He worked at Oklahoma City University Library at the time. And they told him what had happened, that I had been injured. They didn't know where I was. And he went home and just waited. That's all he could do until he got called that they had word which hospital I was in. And so he went there, and so he's with me and in my room by shortly after noon that day. I mean, it was an amazingly quick thing. And I would be in hospital. It was on a Wednesday morning. I was released from the hospital on Friday after the surgery, and then would go back for 3 other surgeries to remove glass. That shattered the glass from windows, glass from the light fixtures and light tubes, and other debris were so terrible for causing so many of the injuries. And I was back to work the following week in temporary quarters back in the Historical Society building. They would eventually move us into new leased space over in Shepherd Mall, where we would stay until we moved here to the Oklahoma History Center after it was completed. We moved here in June of 2006. But the bombing experience was a very difficult time for everybody in this community, and people really stepped up and helped one another. My staff, they kept on doing their work, even though they were recovering from a very frightening ordeal. We just worked together in very, very temporary and primitive conditions almost. We didn't have access to our files. We didn't have our computers. We had an IBM Selectric typewriter and yellow notepads and phones. We functioned that way for several weeks until the state hired a hazard mitigation company that went back into the building to remove everything from our offices that they could recover and put it in temporary location. We had to go sort through our furniture, find our files. There were a lot of people that volunteered, and including from our colleagues from OSU, History and Geography Department were down here helping people from just all over the place, agencies, OU and other places that we partnered with, helping get our files in order so we could function. And it was a very, very difficult time for everybody, but we got through it. As I've already mentioned, we are responsible for reviewing federal construction work. That includes recovery from disasters like that. And so we had to work to go back in and perform our duties under that federal law, working with Federal Emergency Management Agency and other federal agencies that were involved in that recovery from the bombing, and to do our work. The National Park Service, the National Trust for Historic Preservation stepped in. We were given special grant money to assist in identifying historic buildings and doing some planning and work and to assist in recovery for some listed buildings such as the churches. The city of Oklahoma City used some of that money and matched it, and we got National Register nomination done for Automobile Alley and just several things like that. And we went building to building doing some initial damage assessments, looking at it from a historic preservation perspective, and provided a report to City Council. And that data has been used by a lot of people over the years, the damage that are studying the kinds of impacts that violent acts conducted like that, the kinds of damage that it does, and ways that you can either minimize the risk of that damage occurring or help to minimize the impact of the damage. And because of my involvement in all of that recovery, I was named to one of the special task forces that was looking at a number of issues related to the National Historic Preservation Act under the Preserve America legislation that was passed during the George Bush years. And of course the Hurricane Katrina would happen in the midst of some of that, and they held President Bush had named First Lady Laura Bush to head the Preserve America Summit effort in combination with Mr. John Naw, who was the chairman of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, and they called us together in a special meeting in New Orleans. So we met down there it was about 8 months after Katrina, I believe that was held, 8 or 9 months. So we were about the only people in downtown New Orleans at that time, and I was on the committee that was looking at how you treat historic property to prevent impacts from man-made disasters is what we were looking at, and how you harden historic buildings that are mainly in public service, where you need to be able to allow the public in, but then to harden them so that the people that would do us harm with no concern, that hate government for whatever their warped reasons are. So that was a really interesting thing for me, something that I'm glad I had an opportunity to participate. I'm not happy about the circumstance that caused me to have the experience they were looking for to deal with that. But it was one of the most interesting things that I've done, because the panel I was working on, I was the only person representing historic preservation among that group of people. And they were from all over the country. There were engineers, there were security consultants and architects and all kinds of people involved. So we get to do a lot of things. We work with a lot of organizations and private concerns that people don't necessarily associate with historic preservation. And during that time of the Murrah bombing, it brought a lot of that to the fore for a lot of people about how what we do is intertwined with our overall community development efforts statewide, and even with our assistance to other state agencies and federal agencies too.
And some of that work has got you a national award?
Some of that is probably part of reasons. After the bombing in the late 90s, the National Trust for Historic Preservation presented me with one of their honor awards that they do each fall, and I was very proud to receive that recognition. That was presented to me in Chicago at their national convention that year, and it was a very special honor that at the time, First Lady of Oklahoma, Kathy Keating, was also serving on the National Trust Board of Advisors, and their tradition is that an advisor from the state of the award recipient is there to present the award on the trust's behalf. And Mrs. Keating did me the great honor to come to Chicago and be there for that award ceremony and present the award. That meant a lot. When you're a state employee, to have your First Lady be willing to do that was very important to me. Then in June of 2016, I was very surprised to get to go to Washington to receive from Secretary of the Interior Sally Jewell. She gives, the Secretary of Interior presents 4 historic preservation awards a year, and one of those goes to a State Historic Preservation Office staff member, and she presented that to me for basically a lifetime achievement award, I guess, when you've been doing something for 40 years. So, but that was a very special time to go and do that. And they present that award to an SHPO staffer, a member of a local government preservation program called Certified Local Governments, a tribal historic preservation office staffer, and a federal agency staffer for their contributions to historic preservation. So there were 3 others recognized that day by Secretary Jewell. So that was a very big honor for me.
You did highlight, huh?
Yes, yes.
Well, you've had quite a few. You've had it for 40 years. That's amazing, I think.
So, well, I've had a lot of opportunities extended to me and a lot of people that helped me to be able to work here for 40 years. A lot of good people backed me up through the years as members of my staff, members of the administration here. Dr. Bob Blackburn is our current Executive Director and State Historic Preservation Officer, and he and I have known one another since our time at Southwestern at Weatherford. He was a year ahead of me there. We would be in graduate school at the same time at OSU, and then our career paths just happened to be that we both wound up working at the Oklahoma Historical Society. So
a lot of connecting the dots.
Lots of connections. Lots of OSU connections.
Well, I'm just curious, do you live in a house that's on the National Register?
I actually do. My husband and I live in a 1910 bungalow that is
cool.
Located in Oklahoma City's Mesta Park Historic District, and that district is listed in the National Register.
Thanks to you or before you?
Well, the nomination would happen right about the time that I was buying the house, so I had to recuse myself from any involvement in that nomination. But that neighborhood is, if you're familiar with Oklahoma City, it's immediately southeast of the Gold Dome Bank at 23rd and Classen. So that's where we're between 22nd and Northwest 17th and roughly Western and Walker is where we're at. So
okay,
near downtown.
I kind of thought you might be, though.
I love that. Yes, I wouldn't live anywhere else.
Well, and you mentioned that you're visually impaired.
Yes.
Has that had an impact in one way or the other?
Well, I tell you, it does have an impact because I have to do some things in a different way than everybody else. But I've always been able to adapt. I can't drive, so that has limited some of the things. But one of the real benefits of working for the Oklahoma Historical Society is the agency has given me the opportunity to advance and to work here, and that my vision has never been an issue in that, and I totally understand that not everyone gets that kind of opportunity to show what they can do if they're just given a chance, regardless of what the disability may be. And they have made some accommodations for me about how I do things, not that I get out of doing them, just how I do them. And so that's been really important to me, and that I would want noted that, that they get the credit for giving me an opportunity to have a career that's meant a tremendous amount to me in my life and will always be important to me.
Well, you're a good role model too for others coming down the pike that might have a disability of some kind, that there is.
So,
you can do it.
Thank you. And I hope, and that's one of the things that I hope that I could do, is to show people that, you just don't worry about what other people think or say. You don't need to worry about that.
No, just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it. Well, we've covered a lot. Is there anything that we've left out that you want to add before we close out?
No, I really think that we've covered everything. I just want to thank you for this opportunity. It's been fun, and I'm glad to be a part of the OOHRP Library Project.
Well, I usually end by asking people how do they want history to view them. If history's written about you, what do you want it to say?
I guess if history does wind up being written about me, I want them to make really sure that they know that Melvena Heisch grew up on a farm in western Oklahoma and has had her family is important to her, and that all of her friends and the associates through my college career and since are just so important to me, that it was the people connections have always been the most important thing to me, and about the work that we do here. It's the people that all of this is important to, because all of these historic places are important because of their association to people. And that's what's most important, that we remember, gives us the chance to make sure that every person's story, regardless of where they live or their ethnicity or their religion, they've had an important role in this state too, and we get to help document that every day of the week through the National Register program. And that's what I'm really, really proud of that, and I hope that gets noted.
That's a good answer. That's similar to what I could say about what I do. Collecting the stories is part of it. So yeah. I appreciate you sharing yours with us today.
Thank you.
You've been great. What would you like to add?
I just happened to think that I needed to mention perhaps one of my favorite National Register listed properties in Oklahoma because of its OSU connection. I'd not been working on the staff here very long. This was in the late 1970s, and we were processing National Register nomination forms that the OSU History Department were generating. And one of those that I read was for Magruder plots. And for anyone who is listening to this who doesn't know what that is OSU's test plots where they experiment and study wheat yields. And it's important for their work there to study wheat grown on the same earth for their long-term studies. So for that reason, as the campus grew, and as I'm recalling now, expanding to the northwest, they relocated the test plot. And the National Register criteria provides that in most circumstances, moved properties are not eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. And generally, when you think of moving a historic property, you think of moving a building. Train depots, for example, get relocated all the time. And so you think about those being moved. But in this instance, OSU Agriculture Department went in and, through a very careful process, stripped up that sod that they had been growing wheat on for almost 100 years and relocated that sod to its current location. Magruder plot still exists as far as I know right now. Still exists, put that sod right back down and continue to do their wheat yield studies on those plots. So when that test plot got out to Washington, D.C. for the keeper of the register to consider. The staff person there, who was our reviewer at that time, was a woman named Beth Boland, who would become a very, very good friend of mine. And Beth and I would laugh about this many times, that it was one of the first nominations she ever reviewed and was responsible for saying it's eligible. And what she had was to consider was a patch of dirt. No building, usually a site, there was no building, it was the site of something, and the site had been moved. And as far as I know, it is the only relocated site listed on the National Register of Historic Places, but incredibly important. And it's one of those that's always fun to show people who think historic preservation is just about museum buildings, houses of the rich and famous that are used as house museums, which couldn't be further from the truth. It's about the processes that tell the entire story of human activity, including scientific research on wheat yields, and continued in that. And it's just really one of the most fun things that I got to be involved with in my career, was that particular nomination.
Well, was it challenging to get it passed or approved?
No, the argument that was presented was very clear. They justified that it had to be moved or it would have been otherwise lost, and that's one of the things that you have to prove in order to get them to consider. And the fact it was how it was moved so carefully. It was protected, actually, the integrity of the dirt. So it was so carefully relocated and continued in the same function, and it was automatically, they never even asked questions about it. It was automatically listed in the National Register. There are some of those landmark things that are listed that are always with you, like the Skirvin Hotel here in Oklahoma City. It's always been a really special one for me as well, and it sat vacant for so many years, and it got to be rehabilitated and returned to its original function as a hotel using our federal and state credits. And when you saw the hundreds of people that showed up that day for the ribbon cutting, and all of the people that spoke about why that hotel was important to them, again, it just re-emphasizes that what this is all about is what it means to the people.
About when was that, the Skirvin rehabilitation?
The Skirvin was reopened for business in February of 2007.
Okay.
And it had been closed since 1989, and it had gotten in really terrible, just sat there empty and was in really, really horrible shape. The roof had leaked some, and it had not been very well maintained, and so there was a lot of work to do. There was worry on the part of people here in Oklahoma City that it might even be demolished, but thanks to the city of Oklahoma City, Mayor Kirk Humphreys and City Council, they were not going to let that happen. They knew they could not have all of the revitalization that was going on from maps and things around it. They needed a first-class hotel downtown as part of that, and they did not want to lose their landmark hotel. And so they made it happen. They took proposals to find the right developer. Dr. Blackburn got to serve on that selection committee, and they found Skirvin Partners LLC that developed it under the Hilton brand. They were excellent to work with. It was a massive tax credit project for our staff to be involved in, and it was one of those projects that could have been so difficult and could have gone so wrong, but it went so well and everything turned out great. And the project is a real point of pride for the city and for our office and a lot of other people. And the day of the ceremony, by the time it opens, Mick Cornett has taken office as our mayor, and so Mayor Cornett spoke at the ribbon cutting ceremony, recalling his senior prom was held there, and former city council member and county commissioner, Oklahoma County Commissioner Willa Johnson, spoke, because as a teenager, young woman, I think she said she was 18 the summer that she did this, Willa worked as an elevator operator in the Skirvin Hotel. And she was so proud and so thrilled about the building reopening and the rehab, and it was just really exciting day for her. And Willa is African American. And when she was working in that hotel, she would not have been allowed to spend the night there. But still, this place had important memories for her in her personal history, and she was as proud as anybody who ever had their senior prom there or spent the night there for their honeymoon. She was that proud of that place. It was just a very heartwarming stories that were shared that February day.
Yeah, if I recall, Governor Bellman did some things in that, like political things happened in that building too.
It was the place to be seen in Oklahoma City for decades. For decades, it was the place, and there were just all kinds of receptions and banquets and political events and things that happened there. All kinds of celebrities who'd spent the night there, and they're all really proud of those. There are a couple of books about the Skirvin that have been written that will recount some of those. And of course, Pearl Mesta's father, William Skirvin, was who built the hotel originally, and she would go on to fame in Washington, D.C. as the hostess with the mostest, and there's some books about her, and the neighborhood where I live, Mesta Park, is named for Pearl Mesta. So lots of connections.
Yeah, circle back around.
Circle back.
Well, what about the old Central on the campus, OSU campus? Was that before or after?
But the old Central, that one, you can trace the history of old Central's preservation and just parallel that with historic preservation in Oklahoma. It was listed in the National Register in the 1970s, very early on. And in those days, our office had enough federal dollars to use for actual restoration grants. So Oklahoma State University had made an arrangement with the Oklahoma Historical Society for our agency to protect that building and to adapt it for some kind of new use. And funding is always a problem for things like that. And Dr. Leroy Fisher would be the one credited, as far as I'm concerned, for that building surviving. And he was a strong, strong advocate for its preservation, understood its importance, was on the OHS Board of Directors, and we were able to allocate some of those federal dollars to do some basic stabilization work and ultimately some actual restoration work. The Oklahoma Historical Society operated a museum of higher education there for a short time, but it just was not a financially sustainable situation due to state budget limitations and things. And eventually, the Oklahoma State University identified a new use for that building for the university as the home for the I believe it's for the advanced studies program. I may have the honors program, for the honors program at the university, and worked closely with the Oklahoma Historical Society to make that transition and to use a great deal of care in adapting that historic building for a new use while respecting the historic character of that building and maintaining some museum exhibits there. So I think that was a win-win for everybody that was involved. And so students, OSU students of today, can still go back in the building where the first students to attend OSU were going to class in that building.
In the Flores Creek.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So that's an iconic building, of course, for us. So
yes, absolutely.
Anything else?
I think
anything else?
I think that does it. I'll quit.
Okay.
Remembering.
Well, I guess I should say what's next for you. Since you're retiring soon, what do you plan to do next? So then I'll quit.
Well, one of the things that I'm going to do is just kind of take some time and just be at home for a while. I guess like everybody does, you clean out the closets and that sort of thing. And I plan to try to be involved in some nonprofit organizations related to preservation. I'm not exactly sure what that involvement will be, but I plan to do that. I'm very interested in education for historic preservation and hope that I might be able to be of assistance to some of the programs at OSU and OU that teach related courses. And I've got some ideas I want to share with both universities about helping us train so that we make sure that there are students that are being trained to deal with these programs today. There's a lot of things that they need to be expected to do when they come to work in our office or for federal agencies that aren't really a part of anybody's core curriculum for classes in the humanities. And so I'm hopeful that I'd be able to find a way to be helpful in that way. And I also may do a little bit of writing on some things. I've got some nieces and nephews who never really got to know their grandparents just because of the dates when they were born, and some family stories that my sister's the family genealogist. She graduated at OSU, by the way, in 1984, and so she and I have some things that we want to do to connect her genealogy work and my interest in just writing history. So I think we're going to do some writing about our family's history so that we can leave that for the kids to have. And it's not a real thing for me that anybody see it to publish it. It's just a thing to leave it behind. And hobbies, I love to read, so I'll continue to do that. And my husband and I love live music performance, especially rock and roll. So I plan to continue to go to concerts.
And your hearing's pretty good, huh?
It is. It survived.
Do you wear plugs?
No. I don't. I just
Tap your feet and go on.
Plan to just keep on going. I grew up as a huge Beatles fan, and I continue as a real Paul McCartney fan. And I just saw my 12th Paul McCartney concert on the 17th of July here in Oklahoma City. So I hope there's a lot more of those I get to go to.
Well, I do too. Well, then we'll end again. Thank you again.